Welcome, everyone, to another edition of The Travel Show with your host, Ted Blank of Ted Blank Luxury Travel and Adventure. And as we do every show, we so enjoy learning more about the travel industry from an expert named Ted Blank. How have you been?
I've been doing well, thank you.
Well, good. So what's news in your world?
Well, there's always news. There's always news in the travel world. You know, as we start to get through the year, you start to kind of figure out where people are going and what are the hot destinations and, you know, what questions people have. And I think one of the things that I've observed now, you know, maybe in the last year or so, is that there is definitely a trend towards folks who want to do trips that are a little closer to home.
Okay.
And I think right after COVID, everybody was like, yep, I'm going to go discover the world. I'm going to go as far as I can go. And so vacations to Europe were, you know, super popular and Italy was just off the charts. And now I think people are thinking, well, maybe we'll stay a little closer to home.
Do you think it's because of the economy?
I don't know if it's necessarily the economy. I think it's to some extent some of the inconveniences of traveling that far, you know, long flights and time zone changes and things like that. And, you know, most people might go to Europe once in their life. You know, I seem like I go there once or twice or three times a year.
Yes.
So for me, it's not that far, not that big of a deal. But for a lot of people, it's the kind of place they go once and they feel like they've done it. And now they want to do something a little closer to home, or they're at the point in life where the idea of a 12-hour flight in a economy class seat just doesn't sound so good.
So how has that translated into your world?
Well, certainly Alaska has been and continues to be the most popular destination by far. But there's been a lot more interest in trips to Canada and New England. And cruises to Canada and New England.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, we've talked about Mississippi River cruises and coastal cruises here in the United States, but this year is the year of the Great Lakes cruise. And the Great Lakes cruises have become very popular, and there are now 4 companies that operate cruises on the Great Lakes. And 5 years ago, there was one once in a blue moon.
Really?
You could get into the Great Lakes. So it's becoming a cruise destination. It's not; these aren't big ships. These are all small ships.
Oh, they are.
So they're not going to be like the 1,000-footer ore boats you're going to see out there. They're pretty small cruise ships, you know, 100 to 300 passengers. But yeah, it's been interesting. And I mean, how close to home? You know, you can embark in Milwaukee or Chicago or Toronto and places like that, not very far away from here.
Nice.
So one thing about Great Lakes cruises is that they're very much for Americans. You know, you might ask the question, are these for Europeans who come from overseas and want to see the Great Lakes? And certainly they could do that. But most of the passengers who take a Great Lakes cruise are American. And so they're cruising close to home.
Did not know that. You know, I just want to go back quick to river cruises. You mentioned the Mississippi River. Are there still ships that go up and down because the Mississippi?
Absolutely, more than ever. Yep, one of the companies went bankrupt, but their competitor bought them. And so there are actually more ships on the Mississippi now than ever before.
Are any of them still that paddle?
There are a couple that are older paddle wheelers, not really historic kind of reproductions, but unfortunately the American Queen, the real paddle wheeler, has been retired and probably will never sail again.
Such a bummer.
Too bad. Yeah, it's too bad. It was a neat ship.
But there still are options for that.
There definitely are. Definitely are.
So getting back to the Great Lakes, so you mentioned that we could hop on different places. That makes it more accessible for people.
So one of the things about it is that these are not, you know, they may be geared towards Americans, but they're not American ships. They're foreign flagged ships. And what that means is that they can't offer service between U.S. ports. That's against the law. So they can do a round trip from a U.S. port as long as they visit a port in Canada, or they can start in a U.S. port and end in a Canadian port. So a lot of the cruises will be round-trip cruises from either Chicago or Milwaukee, 10 to 14 days. They might be from Duluth to Toronto, but you can't go from Duluth to Chicago. There are lots of different options out there. And you know, it just kind of depends on how many lakes you want to get under your belt. So I'm going on one of these in June with my parents. And so it's a 14-day cruise from Chicago. So we start and end in Chicago. And I think actually the most difficult decision we have to make is, do we fly to Chicago or do we drive to Chicago? And we figured it's probably actually easier to fly to Chicago rather than try to find a place to leave our car for 2 weeks in downtown Chicago. So we'll probably fly to Chicago. And then we go to places that we've all heard of. I don't even probably have to tell people where they are, but we're going to go to Muskegon, Michigan. We're going to go to Green Bay. We're going to go through the Sulaks in both directions.
Okay.
We're going to stop in Mackinac Island. We're going to go to the Painted Rocks Seashore, which is up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, kind of near Marquette. We'll stop in Marquette. We'll stop in Houghton, Michigan, Duluth, and then Thunder Bay. And it's just kind of a neat itinerary. And, people will say to me, well, why would you go on a cruise to Duluth? You can drive there in 2 hours. Well, sure, you can. But it's the experience of traveling on the Great Lakes, and it's the experience of seeing all these things from such a different perspective. We've probably never seen Split Rock Lighthouse from the water.
No.
We're going to see that. We're going to wake up in the morning and we're going to sail through the Duluth Ship Canal, and everybody will be waving.
Absolutely. I've done that 1,000 times.
But you've never just on the little Vista boat. You go out 10 feet and turn around and come back. And so I'm really excited. I think it's going to be a very, very neat thing. And we're seeing places that aren't too far away, but we're seeing it in a very unique way. And all the different cruise lines that cruise on the Great Lakes will include at least one shore excursion in each port.
Okay.
And so you'll have the opportunity to get off the ship and do something organized. And it can be as simple as a guided tour of the city. It could be a walking tour. It could be a visit to Glen Sheen Mansion. Again, things you could have done yourself, but now I have a reason to do them. And, it's traveling with family, so it's kind of a neat thing to do. So it's a real neat opportunity, I think, to see a place close to home differently.
Absolutely. When you said that these are not American ship lines, are they lines that were just invented for the Great Lakes, or is that just an add-on to some of the other?
So there are four different companies.
Okay.
One is a French company.
Okay.
It's called Ponant Cruises.
And do they have other cruise ships?
They cruise all over the world.
Oh, okay.
Yep, they cruise all over the world. The second one is Viking Cruises.
Oh,
so
sure.
they cruise all over the world.
Yes.
They have river cruise ships, but their ships are actually Norwegian ships.
Okay.
So they're Norwegian flagged ships. And then the other two companies are actually owned by American companies, but they operate an overseas division. And so most of the ships will spend the summer season in the Great Lakes. And in fact, the first ships have just kind of come through the Soo Locks here now in the middle of April to start the cruising season.
Oh.
And they'll wrap up around October 1st. And the reason for that isn't because fall isn't a neat time in the Great Lakes, but they want to be up the St. Lawrence River a little further to be able to do cruises in kind of New England and Canada in the fall. That's a very, very popular cruise destination as well. Again, close to home.
Right,
places you could drive, but you're going to see it in a totally different way. And so most of the ships will have left the Great Lakes by the middle of October to spend some time in the Canada-New England area before they'll disperse to different parts of the world, depending on what the operation is. The Viking ships will actually head to Antarctica. They spend the summer in the Great Lakes and the winter in Antarctica. The French ships will scatter to the Four Winds, and the other ships will head down to the Caribbean and Florida, where they'll do some cruises through Florida and kind of the Bahamas. So again, a neat coastal cruise
for sure
experience, but close to home.
Right.
It's an hour flight to Chicago. Easy peasy. Take the train if you wanted to.
No kidding. That would really be easy as well. Yeah. So as these ships are dispersing to the other areas, they're ocean going then?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So this isn't going to be a river cruise ship. These are ships designed to sail on the open seas, and the Great Lakes can throw a little weather at you, so they're designed for that. If it's going to be a gale of November, they're going to stay in port. They're not going to risk it in terrible weather. But they're designed for ocean service, so they're capable of handling the seas and the weather in the Great Lakes.
This is going to be so fun.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it.
Yes.
Kind of a cool trip.
So what do you expect?
Well, it's interesting. So the ship we're traveling on is with a company called Victory Cruise Lines. And they have two ships, and they carry about 150 passengers.
Pretty small.
Pretty small ships. So the size of a river cruise ship. I'm expecting the passengers will be probably in their 60s, 70s. And I expect them to be pretty well traveled. Actually, I expect that most of them will have been to Europe and places like that before. And they're kind of at a stage in life where maybe this is just a little better of a fit for them. But they haven't lost the interest in seeing new places and learning new things. The ships travel with someone they call a Lake Lorian. And the Lake Lorian is an expert on the Great Lakes. And so each evening, there's no Broadway show on these ships. We're going to have a talk from the Lake Lorian who's going to talk about stories of the lakes and things we're going to see tomorrow and, really give us some insight into that. I think the food is going to be great. Looking forward to the food. I know that the cruise lines all focus on that culinary experience. And just being on a small ship and, being able to sit down and pull up a deck chair and read. We have a couple days at sea in there where we aren't going to be stopping in any ports. And so just to kind of decompress and relax, I think will be great. And then I'm excited to visit these ports. I've been everywhere we've been, but I'm just excited to go back and see it as a cruise passenger instead of in my car.
I bet it's going to be a completely different
I think it will be.
experience.
Yeah, I think it will be.
For sure. So when you get into a port, do you ever stay overnight in some of these?
Yeah. Also, many of the cruises will have overnight port calls. Our particular overnight call is in Green Bay.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
so I can go to Titletown Brewery and check out the beer there, or go see Lambeau Field, and I could actually probably drive home, do laundry,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
drive back. But yeah, so many of them will have overnight calls. In most cases, the ships are going to actually dock. They're not going to have tenders.
Oh.
The Viking ships are a little bigger, so there are some of the ports where they actually do use tenders to get you back and forth. But most of these ships are so small that they can just pull up alongside and dock. And, everybody and their uncles is going to want to come down and see what's going on at the port, because there still aren't that many ships. When one comes into town, I think people get
For sure.
excited by that. So
Yeah.
it'll be neat to see who comes down. I'll have to hand out business cards when I'm
I think you
standing
should
there.
actually. Yes, this could be you.
Could be. I could
Maybe
be
have
you.
a
Yeah, this
shirt
could be
made.
you.
Yeah, have a shirt made that says that, and on the back you could put
My
your-
phone number.
Of course, I would do something like that.
Can I get some KDWA swag?
You could.
to wear?
You totally could. Yes, totally could. Well, Ted, I think this sounds really, really fun. Who heard about this? You or your folks?
Actually, we both heard about it at the same time.
You
It was
did?
kind of funny because we've been kind of talking about trying to find a trip to do and something a little bit closer to home. And they had gotten some information in the mail, and I kind of had gone to a seminar where I learned a little bit more about it. And we had kind of a meeting of the minds and quick decision, and here we are.
That's great.
Yeah.
So what do your parents enjoy about traveling?
Well, I think they like to see new and different things. They like to be taken care of. They don't like to have to worry about where to park and where to eat and some of those things. They're both into history and wildlife as well, so hopefully we'll bring the binoculars along and we can look for some, probably won't see any whales
No,
in
but
the Great Lakes, but maybe some birds and
it's going to be
things
such
like
a
that.
nice
And
time.
if we go close to Isle Royale, which I think we will, we'll have to look for the wolves. and
Exactly.
stuff. So yeah, just kind of exciting to do something together, and have some places to see and go that are close by and accessible.
So this cruising season is from basically May to October.
Yeah, basically end of April
Okay.
through the beginning of October.
Okay. And how many different cruises are there in that? Once every couple weeks?
Well,
or
they're 4 cruise lines. I think they're actually about a total of 10 ships if you add them all up.
Oh.
Now in the Great Lakes, and the cruises tend to be 10 or 14 days. Those are the standard length.
Okay.
So 50, 60 cruises a summer would be the total. So not that
Nice.
many. If you compared it to the Caribbean or a river cruise on the Danube, way, way fewer in the Great Lakes. So pretty unspoiled from a cruising perspective.
But this is something that is new within the last 5 years.
Yeah, but a few ships have ventured in every once in a while, but usually it was a one-off, and then it might be several more years before they would come back again. And part of the limitation is that most modern cruise ships can't fit through the St. Lawrence Seaway, so it restricts you to a much smaller
sure.
size of ship, which I think is great because
For
it
sure.
keeps the crowds down
Yeah.
and gives you a more intimate experience. And most of the ports aren't designed for mega cruise ships by any means.
This is going to be so unique.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And it's in our own backyard, which I think is
So
a cool thing.
do you think that a lot of these ports that you talked about, most of them are already geared to tourism?
Yeah, they're all going to have tourism.
Right,
things.
so nobody really had to add anything.
No, actually, Duluth is building a cruise ship terminal.
They are.
Now, yep, it's behind the deck.
Okay.
So it's been under construction, I think, for about a year. And these different cruise ports and the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority and the U.S. Coast Guard and the Canadian Coast Guard all came together, and there was a push to get these cruises into the Great Lakes. Over the last probably 10 years, there's been kind of a concerted effort to do that. And the port cities that I think were the smart port cities said, hey, we're a great spot for you, cruise lines. Come and see our city, and we're going to show you what we can do. Just like here on the Mississippi River, the ports that are smart enough to get a dock there where the cruise ships will stop and dock. That's a big economic boost. You talk to folks in Red Wing, and they'll tell you how important those river cruise ships are, and
For sure.
what a difference it makes to the restaurants and the bars and even supplies. The ships have to buy eggs and fuel and all sorts of
Right,
things
I
like
never
that. So that
thought
can
of
be a
that.
huge boost to a local
Yeah.
economy. So I think the wise ports in the Great Lakes put the effort forward to be able to do this. And there's a lot of logistics that can come along with it.
Sure.
If a cruise is starting or ending somewhere, you need to have security. You might need to have customs and immigration. You have to have baggage
Never even
handling. You have
thought
to
of
have
that.
airplanes for people to get on to fly home. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that you don't realize that has to happen in order to make it possible for a cruise ship to come to a port or even turn around and disembark and embark passengers.
So a cruise like this has to be, as you said, a full circle.
Yeah, or between it starting in the U.S., ending in Canada.
Okay. And is that a law of somebody? Or
There is a law. It's called the Passenger Vessel Shipping Act.
Okay.
And that's the same reason why cruises to and from Alaska, if you're going one way, they have to start or end in Vancouver. They can't
Okay.
start in Seattle. It's a U.S. law. It's been on the books for a long time
And what's the purpose of it?
to protect the American maritime industry.
Oh, okay.
It's the same reason that cargo from Duluth can't be carried to Chicago on a foreign flagged ship. They have to be on American ships.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this will be so fun, and I can't wait to hear all about it when
Absolutely.
you come back.
Yeah.
So I think people would really like to learn more. How could they do that, please?
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me is to give my office a call at 651-964-8245 or go to my website, tedblanktravel.com, and you can request an appointment right on the website. Or we're also open for walk-ins at our office in downtown Hudson from 10 to 2, Monday through Thursday at 206 Locust Street. We're right by the Easter candy store.
Ooh.
So if you need to get a chocolate bunny or a peanut butter egg fix, come on down and visit us when you're there.
How is your foot traffic? Have you had people pop in?
It's always good. Yeah, it's always good.
Love
Definitely
that.
summer better than winter.
Right. Well,
But, Hudson is a busy place
It
all year
is,
round. So
I
it's got
know.
a nice downtown, and it's worth a trip. And if you book a trip when you're on your way for lunch, well, I won't tell.
all the better. Oh,
All
my
the better.
gosh. Thank you so much. Very interesting, Ted. I hope people look into this. And like I said, I can't wait to learn more after you take this trip with your parents. This is The Travel Show with your host, Ted Blank. And Ted is the owner-founder of Ted Blank Luxury Travel and Adventure. We're so happy that he stopped in today. This is AM 1460 and FM 97.7. KDWA in Hastings. This travel show has been brought to you by Ted Blank Luxury Travel and Adventures.